Hello everyone, Scriptreak Apps here. We will discuss a film called Vanilla Sky with the main character named David. David is a young man of a large magazine printing company, inherited from his father. However, David chooses to let go of his responsibilities in managing his father's company and chooses to live more freely. At the beginning of the film, David is seen waking up from his sleep with a whisper, and he wakes up with a stressed face, like someone who is tired from work. David then drove his car, but then he fell into a panic when he realized that the road he was passing had no signs of life at all. But even though the buildings around him seemed to be on fire, David got out of his car and ran and screamed in terror, thinking that he was alone in the world. Suddenly he woke up again from his sleep, and it turns out it was all just a bad dream David wrote. And this is where the story begins. This David is a handsome-looking playboy who is admired by women. And when David got out of bed, there was a woman who had slept with him the night before. The woman's name is Julie. Julie loves David very much and hopes she will marry him someday. But David only thought of him as a friend to make love, nothing more. When in the office, David looks just busy playing and not too serious in leading the company. Long story short, one night at his birthday party, David met a very beautiful woman. The woman named Sophia, who came with her best friend, Brian. Seeing the woman, David was fascinated and he fell in love at first sight with Sophia, who looks simple and not glamorous. Different from the other women that David had met so far, but on the map it was Julie who was still expecting his love. Julie is constantly watching David and does not accept that he is already close to another woman. David felt that Julie had gone too far and became his stalker. And because of that situation, David invites Sophia to go somewhere else to escape Julie. At first, Sophia didn't seem very interested in David, but David, who kept on flirting with her, gradually became happy to talk to David, and after the party, David took Sophia to his house. While at Sophia's house, David was constantly exploring Sophia's personality, which made David fall in love even more. The moment of togetherness, they were full of jokes and laughter, like each other, painting each other, listening to music together and many other things, until the moment when David wanted to go home. Sophia told David to close his eyes because Sophia wanted to kiss David's forehead. But accidentally Sophia kissed David's lips. And that embarrassed him half to death. When after leaving Sophia's house, it turned out that Julie was waiting for David outside, Julie then invited David to get in her car to go around for a while. But here is the biggest mistake in David's life. If only David didn't obey Julie and didn't get into the car, maybe David and Sophia could still be together. And then Julie was declared dead in the accident. David survived, but his right hand was paralyzed and one side of his face was badly damaged. And now David was no longer a handsome man who easily attracted the hearts of women. And because at that time medical science about plastic surgery was not very developed, as a result, as much as he could pay for the best doctor in town, the doctor still didn't know how to get David's face back to normal. To protect his face and speed up healing, David must wear a white silicone mask, which functions to restore skin cells on his face, but the condition is that David must wear the mask for a year. David also became stressed because he had to wait for a year to be able to meet Sophia again. Because of his current facial condition, it was impossible for him to find the woman he loved. David's easygoing nature has now changed 180 degrees, and one day, David, who felt he couldn't stand it because he really missed Sophia, finally got up the courage to meet Sophia. And after Sophia saw David's face for the first time after he disappeared, Sophia was shocked by David's face. However, since Sophia is such a bad person, she can hide her feelings and act as if David's face isn't that bad. Hearing that David was happy and then invited Sophia to a party at a nightclub, the three of them with his best friend, namely Brian. Then that night while at the club, Sophia constantly felt uncomfortable with David's drunken attitude. With that ugly face, David told Sophia to tell the truth about his face. Because David actually knew that Sophia was pretending to like David, But Sophia didn't feel good even though she didn't want to say it, and then said to David that
Tell you in another life when we are both cats.
Heard that too. David laughed out loud and said that
I'll tell you in another life when we are both cats.
Okay, long story short, they finally went home, and on the way home, Sophia said that she wanted to go home first without having to be escorted. Not long after that, Brian also said the same thing, and from that David thought that since David disappeared and appeared with that bad face, Sophia left David and had a relationship with his own best friend, the Brian. Imagining that, David was really disappointed, so he ran after Sophia. But because he was too drunk, David finally fell and was unconscious. The next morning, David awoke to Sophia's whisper, which said that she still loved David very much. And it turns out that the image of Sophia and Brian's relationship last night was just David's imagination, because he was drunk. Finally, they both went home, and since then they have been living together. Arrived one day when the process of healing the face of David's mask was complete. Because it had been a year since he had been able to use the mask, then the day came when for the first time David would take off his mask. And by the time the mask was removed, David's face had healed and was back to normal. David is now a handsome man again. And that made Sophia very happy. The days passed happily between the two of them. But since then, David has often had bad dreams. Like when he wakes up from sleep and looks in the mirror, his face turns ugly again. And other nightmares too. This David indeed feels happy, but he also feels that all his happiness right now is just a dream. Then one morning when David woke up, it turned out that the woman sleeping beside him was supposed to be Sophia, but instead turned into Julie. Julie should have died because of an accident first. David suddenly panicked, then when David checked all the photos and Sophia's belongings at his house, it turned out that all the photos had changed faces, became Julie. Then out of panic and disbelief, because all this time it turned out that Sophia was July and Julie was Sophia. David then took a pillow and then held Sophia until Sophia couldn't breathe and died. David was eventually jailed for the murder charge. There he met a psychologist who kept him company and listened to story after story of David. The psychologist actually wanted to find out the motive for David's murder because at this time David was considered insane by the police. Because he felt he didn't kill Sophia, but Julie. But psychology instead became very close to and concerned with David. And the two of them were so close, David also considered him like his own father, where David's parents had died from childhood and only left his company. David also told me that everything he had experienced so far, even up to the time of the murder, he felt just like a dream. His face, which he thought had healed before, turned out to be just a dream. But he also doesn't know why. Finally, after all the work of the psychologist was deemed to have been completed, the psychologist left. But at that moment, David finally remembered that he had visited a company called Life Extension. That company is a company where people who feel their lives are ruined, such as old people, people who are very sick, etc., come there to be frozen in a capsule later, in very cold temperatures. And later, the person will be hibernated or put to sleep for years, or even decades, or even centuries. So that person's life will change. Moving from real life to dream life. Which means, if that person in real life has bad luck and suffers, then in his dream, later he is free to realize whatever he wants. If in real life he is seriously ill, then in his dream he will be healthy. And if that person breaks up like David, then in that dreamland he will be very harmonious again with Sophia. And the dreamland is named Lucid Dream. But David also asked, what if the dream turned into a nightmare, as he is currently experiencing? Then the company's customer service said that in the dream world he was not alone, he would be accompanied and guided by a technician. Finally, David realized that all this time he had been dreaming. He panicked, then ran and shouted for the technician, then said that his dream now had turned into a nightmare. The technician also appeared and then explained everything to David. Apparently at night, David after coming home from the club and chasing Sophia until he fell, and the next day David never saw Sophia again. Since then, David began to accept his condition as it is and began to seriously manage his company until it was successful and progressed. However, in the midst of his happiness, every night, David always feels lonely and misses Sophia all the time. Until his longing was unbearable, David finally found on the internet there was a lucid dream company. David signed a contract with that company, and then he fell asleep hibernating and was put in a capsule. Since then, David is considered dead. And his best friend, Brian, held a 3-day commemoration event at David's house, but since David's death, there is someone who will never be able to forget him. David, who thought that Sophia had left him, turned out to be wrong. Sophia never forgot him at all, not even for a second, but Sophia was the only one who could never recover. Finally, when he reached the top of the building, the technician said that he had fixed his nightmare problem and it was back to normal. Now David just has to choose to continue his dreamland or wake up from his sleep and return to the real world. However, in the real world it would be very much different from what David remembered before. Because David had been sleeping for hundreds of years. David's financial condition is no longer what it used to be and is very thin, but in the end David prefers to stay awake. And no matter how bitter it is, the realm of reality will still be better than the realm of dreams. And before David jumps from the building, David has a request to meet Sophia one last time. When meeting Sophia, David also said that,
Look at us. I'm frozen and you're dead. I lost you when I got in that car. I'm sorry.
I'll find you again.
I'll see you in another life. When we are both cats.
Then he jumped from the building, and finally, he woke up from his sleep.
David, open your eyes.
And the movie ends. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to press the subscribe and like button, because I will make many videos like this in the future. I hope you are all entertained. See you in the next video.